Since that day, the house has been eerily quiet. The distance I felt from my parents, the shock of losing my brother Andrew, and the cycle of blaming myself made me retreat into my room. How long had I been living like that? One day, Mom knocked on my door. She called out to me from behind the door, almost shouting, "Samantha! Open up! We need to talk!" I thought about ignoring her and letting it pass. But if I didn't open the door, I might never have a proper conversation with Dad or Mom, and I might never leave this room. Suddenly scared, I slowly opened the door. Mom looked at me with those kind eyes, staring straight at me. There was a determination in her eyes that made me take a step back. Fear. It was the first time I felt fear toward Mom. As Mom slowly approached, fear surged within me, and I slipped past her, rushing into Andrew's room. It was the first time I'd been in Andrew's room since he passed away, and nothing had changed. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of Andrew. "Samantha!" I loved how he always called my name with a smile. But he was no longer here. Realizing that, I collapsed to the floor and cried loudly. Mom stood behind me, watching. Dad and Mom sat down on either side of me, and Dad spoke quietly. "I don't know where to start. But can you read Andrew's diary first?" Dad handed me his diary. I took it hesitantly. Then I slowly started reading. Both Dad and Mom were teary-eyed, but I was too shocked to react. "I always knew we'd have to talk about this someday," Dad murmured apologetically. "Welcome home." Mom greeted me as I came home exhausted from work. "Dr. Samantha, you look tired again today." She made me my favorite decaf coffee. Dad had been up until a moment ago, but he decided to go to bed early for the next day. I guess that's reasonable. It was already past 11 p.m. "Thank you, Mom." After seeing me drink my coffee, Mom also headed to her bedroom. Samantha, 39 years old. There's a reason I'm still living at home at this age, unmarried. I'm a surgeon at a general hospital. Sometimes I'm called in the middle of the night, and there are times I can't come home at all. My hectic schedule made it hard to find a supportive partner, but that's not the only reason. When I turned 30, I started feeling conscious about living at home, so I considered moving out, but my parents opposed it. You might think they were being overprotective, but that wasn't the case. I'm terrible at housework. Cleaning, laundry, cooking, I'm bad at all of it. I want to do them, but I just can't seem to do it right. My parents know this, so they opposed my moving out, seeing the disaster my place would become. Mom would often joke, "I wouldn't be surprised if mushrooms started growing in your room." And I couldn't argue with her. If I had moved out, I probably wouldn't be calmly drinking coffee now. I'd be collapsing at the messy entrance instead. I'm truly grateful. As I passed by my parents' room, I expressed my gratitude in my heart and sank into my bed. The next morning, I headed to the living room after waking up. I had taken the day off, so there shouldn't be any urgent calls. But I couldn't let go of my mobile phone just in case. My parents were already up and had finished breakfast. "Good morning, Samantha. You were up late last night. Are you okay?" Dad asked kindly, showing his concern. "I'm fine." I sat down next to him and looked at the newspaper. Dad murmured as he watched me. 23 years, huh? I glanced at the date on the newspaper. Exactly 23 years. I nodded with an awkward smile. After finishing breakfast, Dad and Mom and I got ready and got into the car. Dad tried to drive, but I told him, "I'll drive. I haven't driven in a while, and I need to get back into the swing of it." And I took the driver's seat. The car ride was unnaturally silent as we headed there. No one spoke a word. I'm sure they each had their own thoughts. As I drove, memories flooded my mind. When we arrived at the cemetery on the small hill, we started walking silently. We reached a particular grave. After cleaning the grave, we closed our eyes. Finally, Mom spoke. "Andrew, we're doing well." Dad and I nodded deeply at her words. Each of us spoke to him in our hearts, and then we all looked up at once. "Shall we go now?" I called out to my parents, who seemed like they would stand there until sunset if I didn't say anything. Watching them head back to the car, I spoke to the grave. "We'll come again, Andrew." And we left the cemetery. We decided to have a meal before heading home and went to a nearby restaurant. When I reached into my bag for my mobile phone, I saw something that caught my eye. It was something Andrew had bought for me when he was still alive. As I held it and reminisced, Dad spoke to me with concern. "I'm fine. Just remembering," I said with a smile. My parents are incredibly kind to me. Even though I'm old enough to be called an aunt, they still worry about me. I hardly ever remember being scolded. More than my parents, my brother Andrew showered me with love. When I was little, he always held my hand until I was embarrassed and refused. Whenever I went out with friends, he'd warn me to watch out for cars and not to go with strangers. I often thought he was overly worried. But I was happy. I felt loved and cherished. And I loved him just as much. Whenever I heard friends talk about fighting with their siblings, I wondered why they fought because Andrew and I got along so well. But I also found it curious. No matter how selfish I was, my parents and Andrew would listen with a smile. Why was I so precious to them? I would find out much later. When I started high school. It wasn't within walking distance, so I had to take the train. Andrew's worry seemed to intensify. "Take this." He handed me a personal alarm, in case I needed help, and I burst out laughing. I'm not an elementary school kid. Besides, if this goes off on the train, it'll be a nuisance. Seeing me laugh, he looked a bit sad. Appreciating his concern, I said, "I'll keep it as a good luck charm because it has your thoughts in it." When I put the alarm in my bag, his expression turned to relief. He also asked me in detail where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing whenever I was a little late. I thought about getting a part-time job once I got used to high school, but I doubted he would approve. It worried me. One day, a friend I made in class asked if I had a mobile phone. I had planned to get one once I started working, but there was the issue with Andrew. Most of the kids in my class had one, and it was essential for communication. How could I get one? Then Andrew muttered, "It's good that you're making friends, but it worries me not knowing where you are and what you're doing." At that moment, I had an idea. "Then why don't you buy me a mobile phone?" I thought it might be too much to ask, but it was worth a try. I had never asked Andrew to buy me anything. I didn't want to exploit his kindness. I was surprised at my own words. "A mobile phone?" Andrew looked puzzled. Maybe he thought it was unlike me to ask for something. Was I being too selfish? Anxiety wrapped around me. Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. Then, "That's a great idea." Andrew was excited, asking when we should go shopping and what model I wanted, not caring about my surprise. On our next day off, Andrew and I went to buy a mobile phone. I was thrilled, both about getting what I wanted and going out with Andrew. I might have been a bit too relaxed or felt too safe with Andrew around. I was distracted that day. Normally, I was aware of my surroundings, but that day my focus seemed narrow. Even remembering it now, I know there's nothing I can do about it. On our way back, we reached a crosswalk. Engrossed in conversation with Andrew, I didn't notice the light. It was red, but I stepped forward. At that moment,
"Watch out!"
Andrew shouted and pulled my arm. For goodness sake, pay attention to the lights. Andrew was scolding me harshly. I had never seen Andrew angry before, so seeing him like that left me speechless. Andrew noticed my stunned expression and quickly reverted to his usual gentle tone.
"Oh, sorry for shouting."
No. It was my fault for not paying attention to the light. Thank you, brother. I must have spoken louder than I intended. He seemed flustered but sighed deeply as I turned to face him. I'm sorry too. Seeing him hunch over with guilt warmed my heart. My dear Andrew. I wasn't a child anymore. I decided I wouldn't just be someone he worried about, but a sister who could stand by his side. As I resolved this in my heart, the light turned green.
"Oh, it's green now. Let's go."
I started walking. But before I could cross, something shoved me from behind.
Ouch!
I fell forward and slowly turned around to see Andrew lying on the ground. What just happened? People around us were in a panic. The driver of the car that had stopped near Andrew was frozen in shock. Andrew lay motionless on the crosswalk. Blood quickly pooled around him, and someone helped me to a safe place. Andrew. I called out repeatedly, but he didn't respond.
"Andrew!
I wanted to rush over to check on him, but I couldn't move.
Andrew!"
I screamed through my tears as someone rubbed my back. My mind was in chaos, yet I could distinctly hear someone nearby talking.
His reflexes were incredible.
He saved his sister, but I didn't want to hear it. I collapsed on the street, crying out as loud as I could. Eventually, an ambulance arrived and took Andrew away. Since I was also injured from the fall, I went to the hospital with him. Even in the ambulance, I kept calling his name. But he remained unconscious. Why did this have to happen? He was supposed to help me set up my mobile phone when we got home. I had planned to text him every day to keep him updated since he always worried. He has to wake up. I clenched my fists, praying for Andrew's safety. My injuries were minor, and by the time my treatment was finished, Dad and Mom had arrived at the hospital. But something was wrong. Mom was hysterically crying, while Dad stared blankly into the distance. Dad, Mom. When they saw me, Mom hugged me tightly, crying, and Dad put his hands on our shoulders. So, they couldn't bear the thought of Andrew being in an accident. But they shouldn't be so down. He would wake up soon. As I was about to say that, Dad spoke first. I'm just glad you're safe, Samantha. Andrew really protected you. What was he saying? I couldn't help but laugh. Dad, what are you talking about? I'm not the only one. Andrew will be fine too. Mom cried louder. I could feel her arms trembling as she held me. Mom, you're crying too much. He will be okay. But neither would respond. How long did we stay there, holding each other? A woman approached us. She led us to a room where Andrew lay, looking very different. Since that day, the house has been quiet, and even with the lights on, it felt dark. My parents didn't speak to me much, maybe out of concern for my grief. They seemed distant, almost as if they were afraid of something. It was a clear contrast to the closeness we had when Andrew was alive. Gradually, I started believing it was my fault Andrew died, and the guilt consumed me. The distance I felt from my parents, the shock of losing Andrew, and the cycle of blaming myself led me to isolate in my room, unable to go to school. I spent my days crying over memories of him. On my desk, the shopping bag from the mobile phone store Andrew and I visited that day remained untouched. How long had I been living like this? Mom brought meals to my door every day, but I barely touched the food. One day, as usual, Mom knocked on my door. "Samantha, I left your food here." I didn't respond and listened as her footsteps faded. Soon, I'd hear the sound of her going down the stairs. But then, her footsteps stopped and came back toward my door. She stopped outside and spoke.
"This can't go on, Samantha."
In a rare, loud voice, Mom shouted.
"Samantha, open up. We need to talk."
I thought about ignoring her and letting it pass. But Mom persistently called out to me and kept knocking on the door. If I missed this chance, it might really be over. If I didn't open the door now, I might never have a proper conversation with Dad or Mom again, and I might never leave this room. Suddenly scared, I slowly opened the door. Seeing Mom for the first time in a while, she looked pale and haggard. With those same kind eyes, she stared straight at me. Mom's determination was clear, and I took a step back. Fear. It was the first time I felt fear toward her. As she slowly approached, fear surged within me, and I slipped past her, escaping from my room. I instinctively ran into Andrew's room. It was the first time I'd been in his room since he passed away, and nothing had changed. His chair, the TV connected to his game console, the suit hanging on the wall. The day we talked about going to buy a mobile phone, Andrew sat in that chair. We spent nights playing games together. I often used studying as an excuse to come into his room and chat about trivial things. The room still smelled like Andrew, bringing back memories. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of him. Samantha. I loved how he always called my name with a smile. But he was no longer here. Realizing that, I collapsed to the floor and cried loudly. Mom watched me from behind. By the time I stopped crying, it seemed the sun had set. Mom, who had been watching over me along with Dad, who had come home from work, slowly approached me. Exhausted from crying and drained of all energy, I had no will to reject them. They sat down beside me, and Dad spoke. "Actually, since Andrew passed away, Mom and I came into this room together once." Dad's voice was as gentle as ever, and the distance I had felt earlier was gone. "There was a diary in Andrew's desk. After reading it, Mom and I realized we needed to face you properly, Samantha." A diary. Did Andrew write it? I had no idea he kept a diary. As I stared in shock, Mom started speaking, holding my hand. "Samantha, I'm sorry. Mom was cold, wasn't she? You must have felt so anxious and lonely. I'm really sorry." She apologized over and over, and I didn't know how to respond. "I don't know where to start. But could you read Andrew's diary first?" Dad handed me his diary. I took it hesitantly. Then I slowly started reading, unaware of the shocking truths it contained. The diary revealed that there was once a girl named Mary in our family. She was our parents' daughter and Andrew's biological sister. The diary began with stories of how the family of 4 lived happily together. Mary and Andrew were very close, and Andrew adored her. One day, Andrew and Mary went to the park together. It was just a 3-minute walk from home. An elementary school-aged Andrew often played there with his friends. Though Dad and Mom had some concerns, they let them go since it was a familiar park. They told them to be careful and not to be late coming home. But a few minutes later, Andrew came back alone. Pale and unable to speak properly, Mom sensed something was wrong and ran outside. On the way to the park, they saw a car stopped. The driver, a man, was on the phone, looking panicked. When they walked around to the front of the car, they found Mary lying there in a state too terrible to describe. I instinctively closed the diary. Despite all the crying, tears still streamed down my face. Mom silently rubbed my back, and after calming down a bit, I continued reading the diary. Losing Mary drastically changed the family dynamics. Our parents blamed themselves for letting the kids go to the park alone. Andrew felt guilty for being unable to save his sister, who was hit by a car right in front of him. Andrew's depression was the most severe, and he started refusing to go outside. He found it difficult to attend school, and our parents, desperate, decided to adopt a child. Do you think it was a rash decision? But it was the only thing we could do. I remembered how I once begged Mom for a sibling, but she gently refused. I later learned that Mom had undergone a hysterectomy. So far, the diary hadn't mentioned me. There were no more children to be born from Mom, and they decided to adopt. My heart pounded as I read on, and what I found next shocked me even more. The child they adopted was a baby girl. Her name was Samantha.
Wait, me?
Dad and Mom were teary-eyed, but I was too stunned to react.
I was adopted.
We always knew we'd have to tell you someday. Dad murmured apologetically. The diary went on to describe how Andrew regained his spirit and how my presence had saved him and our parents. It ended with Andrew's determination to protect his beloved family. After finishing the diary, I took a deep breath. I couldn't believe I was adopted, but more than that, my parents had lost both of their biological children in accidents. That fact was unbearable. I finally understood why I was cherished so much. After a moment of silence, Dad spoke. As Andrew wrote, he risked his life to protect you, Samantha. He couldn't save Mary that day. To prevent the same mistake, he gave his life to save mine. Even without a blood connection. Tears welled up in my eyes again. But even with that, Dad and Mom had been so distant and cold to me. I wondered if they understood my silent sobs. This time, Mom spoke to me. Samantha. Dad and I, it's not that we don't love you. Dad nodded repeatedly. After losing 2 children, we were terrified of losing you too. I couldn't understand the pain of losing loved children. But the deeper the love, the greater the pain must be. We love you, Samantha. You are so precious to us. Please understand that. Listening to them, I realized their fear of losing me had overshadowed their love, making them unsure of how to interact with me.
You should have told me that.
I shouted emotionally.
Since he is gone, you both seemed so distant.
I poured out all my pent-up feelings.
I was lonely.
I blamed myself for Andrew's death, and it was unbearable. My parents' behavior made me feel anxious, lonely, and sad. Mom hugged me as I confessed everything. Then Dad hugged both of us. We cried together, holding each other. Eventually, we looked up, and Mom said, Samantha, we're not perfect, but can we start over together, slowly, as a precious family? I gripped Mom's hand and nodded firmly. To me, you both are my real family. Thank you. Thank you. We looked at each other, and feeling a bit embarrassed, I made a request to Mom. I'm really hungry after all that crying. Mom, can you cook? I'll help. So, for the first time in a long while, our family gathered around the table. Later, I got ready to go back to school. I checked my uniform and hair, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything, repeatedly. And then, I put the mobile phone Andrew bought me into my bag. The mobile phone Andrew bought me had a strap that we picked out together at a shop on the same day. It was something we chose together at a little store. It sparkled as if lighting up my future. After breakfast, I went to the entrance. Suddenly anxious, I looked back at my parents, who were watching me. It had been 2 months since I stopped going to school. Would I fit in with my class now? Sensing my anxiety, my parents each took one of my hands. It's okay. I have a place to come back to. A family waiting for me. Gathering my resolve, I stepped outside.
Who would have thought you'd become such a wonderful doctor?
Still can't cook or clean, though. As we ate, the atmosphere was warm and pleasant. I became a doctor because I wanted to save people like Andrew, victims of accidents. After returning to school, I studied hard, barely sleeping, and got into medical school. Of course, there were many challenges. But Andrew's presence, living on in our hearts, supported me many times. The next morning, I packed my usual work items into my bag and went to the entrance. As I checked for forgotten items, the strap on my mobile phone caught my eye, glittering. I've treasured it since that day. The strap Andrew and I picked out together. Today, it felt like it was encouraging me again. I took my bag and looked back at the house. Then, I said loudly, "I'm off." Along with my parents' voices, I thought I heard Andrew's voice too.
Have a good day. Your daughter cheated on my son.
Karen, Sandra's mother-in-law, yelled angrily.
Sandra would never do that.
I desperately defended Sandra's innocence.
Then how do you explain the baby's eye color?
I had no response to that. Sandra was in the corner of the room, holding her baby and crying. The baby in Sandra's arms had blue eyes.
Take her and get out. And later, you'll be paying a hefty sum in the divorce settlement.
We were miserably thrown out. But I was certain. Sandra wasn't lying. So, I decided to do a DNA test. When the results came back, Karen and her family realized their mistake. And from there, their lives quickly spiraled downward. My name is Carol. Today was a special day, so I was more enthusiastic than usual. On the table were potato salad, meatloaf, and tomato soup. These were all Sandra's favorites.
It looks so delicious. Thanks, Mom.
Sandra's smile made me so happy. From the large TV in the room, cheerful voices played, and the warm light filled the room. The girl in the painting on the wall seemed to be smiling in celebration for Sandra. Don't hold back. Tomorrow's the big wedding day. Sandra lowered her eyes a bit at the mention of the wedding. I wish Dad could be here. My husband, David, is currently working overseas. It wasn't originally planned, but he had a connection to that country and volunteered for the assignment. However, his work there has been full of troubles, and he couldn't make it back for Sandra's wedding. It's disappointing, but I didn't blame David. He earned the money for this house and Sandra's tuition.
Well, Dad is busy. I'll take lots of pictures to send him. Thanks. I really wanted to live together, but William wouldn't listen.
William is Sandra's fiancé. At his strong request, Sandra would be living with his parents right after the wedding. He's a good man, but without his dad around, he's a bit of a mama's boy, isn't he?
Yes, that worries me, but he's a good person.
Sandra blushed slightly. We wouldn't have many more meals together like this. So, I needed to enjoy this moment. But I had one nagging worry.
But Karen seems kind of strange. I'm worried about living with her.
Karen was William's mother. I first met Karen at a family meeting, but I didn't like her from the start. She was small and thin, her short hair mixed with gray and unkempt. She always had her eyes wide open, which made her seem eerie. Her words also revealed her nervous personality. I was worried about Sandra living with someone like her.
Don't worry so much. We're close by, so if anything happens, you can always come here.
Sandra smiled as she took a big bite of the meatloaf.
Yes, if you need anything, I'm always here to help.
We cut the ominous talk short and spent the rest of the time reminiscing and enjoying each other's company. The wedding went off splendidly, and before we knew it, 6 months had passed. Fortunately, their married life had no major issues, and since living alone was lonely, I started a part-time job. One sunny day, while I was cleaning the house, Sandra came over. She hugged me as soon as she walked in the door.
"Mom, I'm pregnant."
Her eyes were shining as she said it. I was thrilled at Sandra's happy news.
"Congratulations. Did you tell William? He must be so happy."
When I mentioned William, Sandra's expression suddenly stiffened.
"Sandra, what's wrong?"
When I looked into Sandra's face, she quickly put on her usual smile. "Nothing, it's just... I have a favor to ask." Sandra's demeanor worried me, but I had to hear her request.
"A favor? What is it?"
Sandra hesitated, lowering her eyes, but then looked me straight in the eye as if making a decision.
"I'm nervous about giving birth. I want to stay with you."
I was taken aback by Sandra's unexpected request. I had imagined something serious, thinking it was beyond my control.
"Oh, if that's the case, there's no problem. Stay as long as you like." "Thank you."
Sandra seemed relieved, exhaling deeply. I wondered if it was okay not to tell Karen, but I assumed Sandra had informed William. However, I soon learned why Sandra's expression had clouded. Sandra quickly packed some basic items and came to stay with me, but soon after, William came over.
"Oh, hello.
Is something wrong?" William didn't respond to my question, standing in the doorway with a pouty expression. I didn't know what to do and stood there awkwardly until Sandra appeared.
"What are you doing here?"
Sandra's words made William finally lift his head.
"Mom told me to keep an eye on you since you're at your parents' house."
William pouted like a sulking child.
"But I explained everything."
"Why did you follow me?" Sandra seemed exasperated by William's actions. They argued for a while, but in the end, William ended up staying at my house. He hadn't brought much, so we had to buy a new toothbrush and underwear for him. Even though he was Sandra's husband, having a man suddenly living in the house made me uncomfortable. Sandra also seemed to find William a bit annoying, but he didn't cause any particular problems. Thus, without any major incidents, we settled into a smooth routine. Sandra was admitted to the hospital for childbirth, and William went back to his in-laws' house, so the house became quiet again. I realized for the first time in months how lonely it is without Sandra's morning greeting. To distract myself from the loneliness, I put extra effort into getting ready for work. Just as I stepped out of the house, my neighbor greeted me kindly.
"Oh, Carol. Thank you so much the other day, you really helped me out."
"It's nothing. I'm always here if you need anything."
"Everyone in the neighborhood appreciates you. If you ever need help, just let us know."
I felt my face flush with a mix of happiness and embarrassment.
"Thank you. I'm off to work now." "Good luck."
I often helped out my neighbors, so it was common to receive thanks like this. However, I felt embarrassed because I thought I was just doing what was expected. Besides, everyone was so kind and gentle that I never felt like I was at a loss. All right, time to get to work. I shifted my focus and headed to my workplace. Just before my lunch break, I received an emergency call. It was William.
"Sandra's contractions have started.
Please come quickly." Feeling a sense of unease at his robotic tone, I left work early and rushed to the hospital. When I arrived, Karen was already there, but she ignored me and kept talking to William. It seemed neither of them planned to be present for the birth, so I decided to wait in front of the delivery room. I was too worried about the baby being born safely to be bothered by their behavior. And equally, I was looking forward to seeing what kind of child would be born. I wasn't sure how much time had passed. Suddenly, the sound of a baby's cry echoed from the room. I looked up to see a nurse peeking out from the door.
The baby is born safely. It's a girl.
I immediately entered the delivery room to see Sandra, sweating but with a relieved expression, holding the baby. I stared at the tiny grandchild in Sandra's arms. The baby, so small, hadn't even opened her eyes yet. The baby was quickly handed over to William.
Sandra, you did great. You were amazing.
Sandra, exhausted, only nodded without replying. Meanwhile, Karen and William were busy discussing what to name the baby. Even after handing the baby to me, they didn't offer any words of praise to Sandra. Instead, they ignored her and didn't even look her way. Watching the two of them, I became worried if Sandra would be all right continuing her married life like this. Fortunately, Sandra and the baby had no health issues, so they were discharged soon. I was eager to see my granddaughter Nancy's face, but I didn't feel like going to the in-laws' house. However, I couldn't tell Sandra to come to my place, so I continued my usual routine. A few weeks after Sandra's discharge, I was at home on my day off. Unfortunately, it was raining outside, so I stayed indoors. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, followed by loud banging on the front door. Startled, I headed to the door and heard shouting from the other side.
Hey, I know you're in there. Open the door.
With trembling hands, I unlocked the door. As soon as I did, Karen shoved her way in, glaring at me with wide eyes.
How dare you deceive William? Take responsibility.
She yelled, her eyes bloodshot and spittle flying. Karen stood behind William, who had a robotic expression on his face.
Wait a minute. What's going on?
I tried to understand the situation, but Karen wouldn't listen.
Do you think you can fool me just because you're rich? I'll make you pay in the divorce court.
She pointed her finger at my face and advanced, causing me to step back.
What is this about? Please explain.
Karen's shrill yelling pierced my ears, giving me a headache.
She cheated. Mom is angry. You need to take responsibility. Enough already.
If this one-sided yelling continued, I felt like I'd lose my mind from the stress. Upon hearing my shout, Karen stopped yelling and stared at me, eyes wide and mouth half open.
I'm sorry. I have no idea what's going on. You need to explain, or I can't say anything.
But Karen and William remained silent. After a brief silence, Karen, with an unchanged expression, spoke.
Fine. Then come to our house.
Following Karen's suggestion, I went to the in-laws' house for the first time. It wasn't far, so we walked. I already felt like I had used more than half of my energy. Reluctantly, I followed the two, carrying an umbrella, while our neighbors looked on worriedly. The in-laws' house was in an old residential area, and the interior was outdated. The color of the wood on the ceiling and walls was dull and dirty, and the floor was old. The lighting was still old fluorescent lights, making the already gloomy weather worse. The furniture and appliances were also old, as if time had stopped 30 years ago. In a corner of the room, Sandra sat with tears in her eyes, holding Nancy tightly.
Sandra, what happened?
Karen answered instead of Sandra.
Look at the color of that child's eyes.
Following Karen's command, I looked into Nancy's eyes. I was shocked and let out a scream. Nancy's eyes were blue.
Now do you understand what we mean? Sandra cheated. Those eyes are proof. Now take responsibility.
Sandra, with eyes full of tears, glared at Karen.
You're wrong. I didn't cheat. Shut up. How dare you betray my precious William?
William joined in.
It's not just me. You made Mom angry too. You'll pay for her retirement as well.
I listened in silence. It was true, Sandra and William both had brown eyes. But I knew Sandra better than anyone. There was no hint of deceit in her expression. I believed Sandra.
Wait. Let's calm down. There must be some explanation. There is no explanation. Sandra cheated, and the color of the baby's eyes is proof.
Karen, with bloodshot eyes, pointed at Nancy. Nancy started to cry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Don't cry, sweetheart.
Sandra desperately tried to soothe Nancy, but the two didn't care. I was worried that continuing the argument here would negatively affect Sandra and Nancy.
Wait. Let's not fight in front of Nancy. Can we go to another room?
The two nodded and led us to the next room. But it was more to escape the crying than for Nancy's sake. Sandra tried to follow, but I stopped her with my hand. You stay here and take care of Nancy. Don't worry, I'll handle this. I didn't want my beloved Sandra to suffer anymore. Mom. However, the discussion didn't progress in the other room either. I desperately explained that Sandra didn't know anyone close with blue eyes.
That's not proof. People can have relationships through social media nowadays.
But they countered. It seems William is more concerned with how much alimony and settlement money he can claim from us in the divorce trial than with the fact that he's been cheated on. No matter what I say, the conversation always turns to money. But there was one unforgivable thing that made me so angry I could barely think about the money. It was Karen's words.
Sandra was supposed to take care of me, but now everything has gone to waste. She needs to take responsibility. Why is caregiving a given? That's just ridiculous.
Does she think Sandra is some sort of housekeeper who can provide care? Even if she's William's wife, there's no way I can allow that kind of treatment. But it seems Karen was seriously planning to use Sandra for her convenience until the very end. And William seemed to think that was completely normal. It was then that I realized just how abnormal this family was.
This isn't going to work. Take that kid and that useless Sandra and leave. I don't want to see them.
Karen spat out those words, and for once I agreed with her. I didn't want Sandra to stay in that place a second longer. I immediately took Sandra and left the house. Sandra cried the whole way home, but once we got back, she seemed a bit more at ease. Her expression softened, and she spoke kindly to Nancy. Sandra, I believe you. But I need to ask. You really didn't cheat, did you?
No, absolutely not.
Sandra looked me straight in the eye, not flinching. As I thought, there was no lie or evasion in her gaze. All right then. So why does Nancy have blue eyes? That's the real problem. I thought about it on the way home, but I had no idea. So I decided to contact David, who was overseas. But no matter how many times I called, I couldn't reach him. Even with the time difference, it shouldn't be that late over there. I decided to call his company directly. It took a bit of effort, but I finally got through to someone there and explained that I needed to talk to David. But it was no use. David was currently working in a remote mountain area, making it difficult to get in touch with him. I was worried about him working in such a place, but there was nothing I could do, so I left a message for him to call me when he returned. Dad seems to be having a tough time. Why did he have to go overseas? Sandra murmured as she looked out at the rain falling outside the window. Who knows, but he must have had his reasons. He doesn't talk much about himself. But I've been thinking, and I need you to hear me out. Sandra turned slowly towards me.
What is it?
To prove your words are true, we need to do a DNA test. I know you don't like it, but please cooperate. There was really nothing else we could do. No matter what we said, we were at a severe disadvantage trying to convince Karen and William. So we needed to use science to prove it. With that, even in court, we could help Sandra. Sandra's eyes lit up at the mention of a DNA test.
A DNA test, huh? That's a good idea. But will William agree to it?
Sandra's concern was soon proven right. On the next day off, I went to the in-laws' house to tell them about the DNA test. As before, the overcast sky made the in-laws' house look like a gloomy cave.
So, we'll get the alimony and settlement money in the divorce trial, right?
Karen was in a much better mood than before.
Yes, and I need to talk to you about that.
At that moment, William came in and made us coffee.
Thank you.
William, you're so good. Such a good boy, Karen said happily while patting William's head. He looked happy to be praised by Karen too.
You two get along well, don't you?
When I said that, Karen and William both looked at me with big smiles. Of course. Since my ex-husband left, William is the only family I have. I love him so much.
I love Mom too.
Karen and William seemed as close as lovers. Honestly, it's terrifying to bring up the DNA test at a time like this, but we can't move forward without it.
So, to clear things up, I think we should do a DNA test.
As soon as I said that, Karen and William froze. Then Karen's eyes widened again, and William looked like a robot.
A DNA test? Are you planning to hurt William?
It seems I've triggered a bad switch.
Your family is the worst. You don't trust us? You look down on us? You don't need a test to know about the affair.
Another attack, but this is the crucial moment.
With scientific evidence, we can both be convinced. We will cover the cost, of course. Science? Just because you're rich, you look down on us. You look down on poor people. I can't take it anymore. William, punish them.
At Karen's command, William stood up expressionlessly.
Please, it's a simple thing. Shut up. I'll post this on social media. William, get the kitchen knife.
Got it, Mom. William immediately headed to the kitchen. It's dangerous to stay here any longer. I took advantage of a moment's distraction, ran past Karen, and dashed to the front door. I grabbed my shoes and rushed out the door.
Wait! You won't get away with this. I'll make you pay.
Karen's screams echoed behind me as I desperately fled. After running a bit, I looked back and saw that Karen wasn't following, so I put on my shoes. The soles of my feet were blistered and painful, but my life was saved. I managed to get back home, but from that day, Karen's harassment began. She posted papers around the neighborhood saying Sandra had an affair, and sometimes she and William would walk around shouting it. I went to the police, but they wouldn't take it seriously because it wasn't a crime. I had to quit my part-time job and couldn't leave the house. This happened almost every day, but at least they didn't come on rainy days. I felt relieved as I watched the rain through the window, knowing Karen wouldn't come. Sandra looked a bit haggard from the stress, but she continued to take care of Nancy without complaint. When Nancy was born, everything was peaceful. I absent-mindedly recalled when Sandra was pregnant. William had forced his way into our home back then. If I had noticed how abnormal he and Karen were at that time, Sandra wouldn't have had to suffer. We had to buy daily necessities for him, but he never paid us back. It was just things like toothbrushes and underwear, not expensive enough to bother billing him for. There, I realized something. That's it. The toothbrush. I haven't thrown it away yet. I immediately went to the bathroom, opened the cabinet, and found William's toothbrush hidden in the corner. I carefully picked it up like a precious treasure and placed it in a plastic bag.
Sandra, I found the toothbrush William used. We can do a DNA test with this.
When I showed Sandra the toothbrush in the bag, her eyes lit up. Soon after, a DNA test was conducted to determine who Nancy's parents were. During that time, Karen's harassment continued, but we waited patiently. Unlike before, we now had hope with the DNA test. It had to be okay. Finally, the envelope with the results arrived, and we opened it together. The results clearly stated that Nancy was indeed Sandra and William's child. Sandra read it and then collapsed to the floor, crying loudly. Whether she was crying out of happiness or frustration, I couldn't tell. What was certain was that she hadn't cheated, and that was a relief. However, the mystery of Nancy's blue eyes was still unresolved. The answer came soon after from a call from David.
Sorry for the late response. What on earth happened?
I explained everything that had happened and finally asked if he knew why Nancy's eyes were blue. David didn't reply immediately but seemed to be thinking. After a while, he started to speak. I've never mentioned this before, but I have a mix of blood from various countries. The country I'm stationed in now is my grandma's homeland. I felt a connection and requested to be stationed here.
I didn't know you had such a reason.
Sorry about that. This is just my theory, but Grandma had blue eyes. If that gene persisted and showed up in Sandra's child, it would explain everything. With David's explanation, all the mysteries were solved, and Sandra and I hugged each other in joy. The next day was sunny, and soon Karen and William came to our house. Since I had the DNA test results as evidence, I invited them in. As soon as they entered the living room, they sat down and started demanding money.
We won't leave until you pay. We might as well live here from now on.
Saying that, they refused to budge. So, I showed them the DNA test documents. After reading them, they immediately started complaining again.
This is fake. You made this to deceive us.
If that's the case, we can do another test. The toothbrush will be enough. But if they were the type to back down easily, we wouldn't have had so much trouble. Instead of admitting their fault, Karen got angry and crumpled up the report, throwing it at me.
Don't get cocky. This fake document means nothing. Then explain why Nancy's eyes are blue.
I explained to Karen exactly what David had told me.
It's in the genes, so it's possible.
If you're still unsatisfied, there's always genetic testing. I made sure to maintain a firm and calm demeanor. The website advised that this was the best way to handle someone like Karen. As expected, Karen and William didn't push further. They seemed to be thinking of a better strategy but couldn't come up with anything. Acting as if nothing had happened, they stood up. Fine. We'll leave for today. Saying that, Karen and William headed to the door, and I followed them out.
Wait a moment. At least apologize to Sandra. You accused her so harshly.
But Karen wouldn't listen and even spat at me.
Shut up. What makes you think you've won? Now I'll post your misdeeds all over social media. Just you wait.
Mom, I'll help too. I'll post embarrassing pictures of Sandra on social media. With those words, the two left the house.
Stop right there.
I couldn't let Karen and William ruin Sandra's life any further. I quickly put on my sandals and rushed outside, only to be met with an unexpected scene. About 10 of our neighbors were surrounding Karen and William, glaring at them.
What do you think you're doing? This is none of your business.
Karen's voice trembled, clearly intimidated by the sheer number of people.
It is our business. You've caused Carol so much trouble. Did you think you could just leave without any consequences?
With those words from a neighbor, everyone started raising their voices. The neighbors surrounded Karen and William, demanding,
Apologize to Carol and Sandra right now.
They shouted in unison. Even the usually brazen Karen was unable to fight back against the crowd of people. Whenever she tried to escape, they quickly blocked her path. For a while, Karen and William stood there, frozen in place. Eventually, they gave in and agreed to apologize to me and Sandra.
We're very sorry. That's not enough. Promise that you'll stay away from us from now on. And delete those photos of Sandra, right here in front of everyone.
I demanded, my tone firm and resolute. But Karen remained silent, sweat beading on her forehead. She likely realized that without those photos, she would no longer have any leverage over us. It was only after the neighbors yelled at them that Karen and William finally accepted my demands. As soon as the apology was over, they scurried away like frightened mice. I was filled with gratitude for the help of my neighbors.
Everyone, I'm so sorry for causing you all this trouble.
But they all looked at me with kind, understanding eyes.
You have nothing to apologize for, dear. We all look out for each other in times of need. You're always there for us, Carol. And we all believed that you were doing the right thing.
At those words, I felt like everything I had been through was finally worth it, and tears began to flow freely down my cheeks. I turned to see Sandra holding Nancy close, crying tears of relief as well. From then on, our days were peaceful and uneventful. On sunny days, bright light streamed into our home, filling it with warmth. In that cozy glow, Nancy would energetically crawl around, playing with her toys. Sandra and I watched over her with adoring smiles.
I'm so glad everything worked out, even though it was really tough for a while there.
Me too.
But who would have thought Karen would end up getting exposed on social media like that? Well, she did bring a lot of attention to herself. And William got demoted and sent to some remote location, too.
I had heard about their fates from the neighbors. Apparently, Karen became so famous that people started vandalizing her house, and she couldn't even go outside anymore. It must be emotionally devastating for her, especially with her beloved William being so far away now. It can't be helped. We did what we could, I said, feeling a twinge of unease as I thought about Karen and William's situation.
Exactly. We went through so much. But I'm just so grateful that we have Nancy now.
Sandra gazed adoringly at Nancy as she spoke. Nancy's once pale blue eyes had darkened over time, turning a rich shade of brown. Without those eyes, Sandra's life would have taken a very different, darker path. Nancy truly saved us in more ways than one.
Well then, I better head out and do some shopping. I want to cook an extra special meal tonight,
I announced, standing up and slinging my shopping bag over my shoulder. His favorite dishes were all memorized, clear as day in my mind. It has been a while since Dad's been home, hasn't it?
Yep. That's why I've got to go all out.
I was excited to cook for David again after so long. He must be looking forward to seeing Nancy too. Our whole family would finally be together again. Feeling the joy of spending time with my loved ones, I headed out to the store.
Emily, is Grandpa behaving himself?
Oh, yes, well, kind of.
Injuring his leg, old people can be such a nuisance. I wish they'd think about those of us who have to take care of them. Patricia, that's not a nice way to say it.
It's fine, he's already declining quite a bit.
I can't handle the fuss of old people. But you're used to it, so you'll be fine.
The other day, my husband's grandfather, Michael, fell in the garden and injured his leg. It's not a serious injury, but he's already 82 years old. Because of his age, we're having him rest in bed just to be safe, so it doesn't get worse. My mother-in-law won't even go near him, let alone take care of him. I'm Emily, 30 years old. I married 3 years ago and live with my husband Daniel's family. My husband was my boss at the company where I worked, a company founded by his grandfather. When I joined 8 years ago, my father-in-law was already the president, and my grandfather-in-law was the chairman. But back then, the grandfather was still handling all the important tasks and responsibilities of the company. 2 years ago, when Grandpa turned 80, he remained chairman but handed over most of the public duties to my father-in-law.
Michael, you've worked hard all this time. Now leave the company matters to Christopher and take it easy.
My mother-in-law said with a smile, but her words sounded sarcastic to me. Grandfather-in-law is a bit stubborn but a fair and kind person with a good reputation. In contrast, my father-in-law seems somewhat immature, never expressing his opinions clearly, and utterly unreliable compared to Grandpa. And he always does whatever my mother-in-law says. My grandmother-in-law has already passed away, and I never met her. My husband and I started dating when we worked together on the same product planning team 3 years after I joined the company. My husband, who was energetically leading the team, seemed reliable to me, though a bit self-righteous. Maybe I felt that way because I lost my father early and grew up with just my mother. My mother also passed away from illness 2 years ago, and now I have no family other than my in-laws. Shortly after I got married, my mother fell ill and needed care. So I quit my job to take care of her. The fact that my husband's family didn't object was probably due to a single comment from Grandpa.
It's only natural to take care of the mother who raised you alone. Don't worry and take good care of her.
Thanks to that, I was able to be by my mother's side every day for a year without financial worries until she passed away. My mother-in-law seemed a bit dissatisfied, but I was truly grateful. However, since Grandpa handed over the company to my father-in-law, everyone's attitude towards him has gradually changed. They no longer listen to his opinions as much. And I can't shake the feeling that they're treating him carelessly. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but watching my mother-in-law and husband's behavior, I can't help but feel that way. My father-in-law's attitude is non-committal. But it feels like he's ignoring Grandpa, as if he's no longer needed since he's practically retired. Watching my in-laws' behavior, I feel somewhat angry.
Hey, don't you think your attitude, Patricia, and yours too, is a bit cold towards Grandpa?
So, what's the big deal?
Grandpa tries to talk to you, and you barely respond. You don't even try to help him.
Like I have time to deal with old people. You can take care of Grandpa. You're the one with free time.
You don't have to talk like that.
Quiet. I'm tired from work. Don't nag me about unnecessary things. This is how it goes. No matter what I say, they won't listen to me. My grandfather-in-law doesn't say anything to his family about this. Now, I'm the only one who talks to my grandfather-in-law at home.
Grandpa, the weather is nice today. Shall we go for a little walk outside? Your leg seems to be healing well, and I think it will be good rehabilitation.
Thank you. Let's go out for a bit then. When the two of us went to the park, there were several families with children playing around. My grandfather-in-law looked at the scene with joy.
Christopher and Daniel had times like that too.
Grandpa? I was busy with work and couldn't take care of the children much. Maybe that's why I couldn't raise Christopher and Daniel properly. My grandfather-in-law said with a slightly sad face, almost like he was talking to himself. Christopher is my father-in-law, and Daniel is my husband. I think about how everyone can be kinder to my grandfather-in-law, but I can't come up with a good idea. But then, my in-laws suggested building a house for my grandfather-in-law. This house is over 50 years old, right? The layout is bad, it's hard to use, and instead of spending money on repairs, it would be better to build a new house in a more convenient location. A new house? Michael is getting older, and it's good that he only got injured last time, but we never know what will happen. So, let's make the house barrier free so we won't have trouble if care is needed. I see. We can even put Michael's room in the middle so everyone can take care of him easily. Yeah, that's not a bad idea.
Right. So, it's settled then? And Michael, about the cost.
If it's a house for all of us, I'll take care of it. Talk to Mr. Jones about the money.
Typical Michael. Thank you. We appreciate it.
My mother-in-law smiled happily. It seems to me that they only flatter him when they want money. But if everyone takes care of my grandfather-in-law after moving to the new house, I thought there could be nothing better. Mr. Jones is the company's in-house counsel and also manages my grandfather-in-law's personal assets. My grandfather-in-law liked his character and made him in-house counsel, and it's been nearly 30 years. He's 58 now and the person my grandfather-in-law trusts the most. I've met him several times, and he seems to be a very honest person. He always cares about my grandfather-in-law's health, and sometimes I think he's more like a son than his real sons. Having such people around my grandfather-in-law makes me feel a little relieved. I wasn't informed about where or what kind of house was being built. But my mother-in-law seemed very cheerful, and the three of them were looking at interior design magazines and discussing various things. So it seemed to be going smoothly. Then something unexpected happened. It was revealed that my grandfather-in-law had a debt of $1,820,000.
Wait, what's this about $1,820,000?
My grandfather-in-law had become a co-signer for a loan for a friend's company. But that company was in trouble, and the debt had become my grandfather-in-law's responsibility.
Wait, they're not going to take the house that's under construction, are they?
Since the contract has already been completed, and as Patricia said, it's in the president's name, so it's fine. My mother-in-law seemed relieved at those words.
Oh, thank goodness. I'm glad we did it my way.
Listening to that conversation, I learned for the first time that the house was in my father-in-law's name. Even though my grandfather-in-law had paid for it, putting it in my father-in-law's name seemed just like something my mother-in-law would do. I also wondered why they didn't think of giving up the house to help repay the debt.
Hey, this debt is Michael's fault, and it has nothing to do with us or the company, right?
Well, it was signed in Michael's name.
Oh, good. Then there's no problem.
I couldn't understand what was good about it. But since my grandfather-in-law didn't say anything during that conversation, I didn't intervene either. After all, it's not an amount I could handle. And a few days later, my grandfather-in-law's behavior began to change gradually. Grandpa, what would you like for lunch?
Who are you calling Grandpa? I'm only 50. You have no right to call me that. Huh?
Sorry. Emily, right? I was lost in thought. At first, I thought he was just deep in thought, but when it happened repeatedly, I began to feel uneasy.
Patricia, what are you doing? Where's my meal?
Grandpa, I'm Emily. Patricia is your daughter-in-law. You ate your meal earlier.
I didn't eat. Are you trying to starve me?
I wondered if my grandfather-in-law's condition was triggered by the $1,820,000 debt. And seeing that none of his family members were trying to help him might have been a double shock. What can I do for him? I tried to take my grandfather-in-law to the hospital, but he refused to go. He might not want to admit that he might have dementia. I don't want to force him, but I can't do anything on my own. I consulted my husband, but he only replied that it had nothing to do with him. I can't rely on my mother-in-law either. So I thought my father-in-law was the only option.
Yeah, I heard from Patricia and Daniel. They think it might be dementia? Can you go to the hospital with us? But it's not that bad yet, right? If we go to the hospital, others will find out. My father having dementia. There are good medications now that can slow the progression. Well, there's no need to rush. Let's watch him a little longer. Emily is here, so it'll be fine, right?
I can't help but think how unreliable these people are. I can't depend on them.
Grandpa, let's go to the hospital. Let's get you properly examined.
Who are you? Where are you planning to take me? You're up to no good. I almost cry thinking about how my once kind grandfather-in-law has become so stubborn. But my mother-in-law just laughs, amused. Even if he was the chairman, it's over for him now. But now everything, even the company, is all Christopher's. Patricia, Grandpa isn't completely unaware. He's listening to everything. He'll forget everything soon. He'll start wandering, dribbling. Just thinking about it gives me chills. He's nothing but a nuisance now. How can you say that? Grandpa has worked hard for the family all his life. My mother-in-law's words make me angry and sad. But my grandfather-in-law just smiles. See? This old man doesn't understand anything. Patricia! I'm furious at my mother-in-law's laughing and words. But soon, the new house will be ready. Things might change once we move there. Since it's a house that Grandpa built, the family might show some gratitude and be kind to him. I couldn't completely abandon that faint hope. And 2 months later, the house was finally built. For days, I had been forced to pack my in-laws' and husband's belongings, while my father-in-law's and my things were mostly untouched. Even when I tried to pack my things, my in-laws and husband kept giving me tasks, so I couldn't make any progress. But I thought it would be fine to move the small things later since this house wasn't going away. On moving day, after moving most of the things, I went to call my father-in-law, but my husband said, you and Grandpa can stay here. What? You can stay in this house. We don't need any extra baggage in the new house. In other words, you and Grandpa will live here from now on. And I'll give you Grandpa's debt too. Well, you can at least be a housekeeper. Hey, let's go. Yeah, I'm coming. Good luck with the debt repayment and live in care. With those words, my in-laws cheerfully got into the car and left. I was stunned for a while. I couldn't immediately understand what had just happened. Were we just abandoned? And not just me, but my grandfather-in-law too. Only they would live in the new house. It took me a while to understand because it was beyond my imagination that someone could do something so cruel. How should I explain this to my grandfather-in-law? I slowly returned to the back room. I don't mind taking care of my grandfather-in-law at all. That was my intention from the start. As I was about to timidly call out to him, who was sitting with his back to me, he seemed to sense my presence and turned around before I could speak. Have they gone already? My grandfather-in-law's expression as he said that looked completely different from the dazed look he had just moments ago. To be frank, he seemed like a different person. I thought maybe a different symptom had emerged. But the next moment, my grandfather-in-law smiled. And then, his following words surprised me. As I was talking to my grandfather-in-law, Mr. Jones came. Chairman,
have you finished getting rid of the unnecessary staff? Yes, it's all done. Let's go, shall we? Where are we going? Of course, to the new house.
I left the house where I had been living, led by my grandfather-in-law, without understanding what was happening. The next month, countless calls came from my mother-in-law and husband. My grandfather-in-law said he wouldn't deal with them anymore, but I answered my husband's call because of the divorce.
Hey, Emily! Is Grandpa with you? When I went to the old house, it was for sale. It's not worth $1,820,000, so you can't repay the debt. Is that why you did that? What do you mean? Put Grandpa on. Dad said he can't get in touch at all. That forgetful old man has done something outrageous.
I knew what he was talking about, but I wanted to hear what my husband would say.
Grandpa sold the company's stocks to the executive director. Thanks to that, the executive director became the largest shareholder, and a shareholders' meeting and board meeting were held. And Dad was dismissed as president.
But the executive director is well liked, and maybe Grandpa thought he was better to hand over the company to?
The executive director must have deceived the senile old man into selling the stocks. This is invalid.
You seem to be misunderstanding something, but Grandpa doesn't have dementia. If anything, he seems more coherent than before.
What?
I too, until that moving day, had seriously thought that my grandfather-in-law had dementia. It seems that my grandfather-in-law had been suspicious from the time my mother-in-law said she would build a house to live with him. So he devised a plan. He pretended to have dementia to see how my in-laws and husband would react. As expected, they showed their true colors one after another. In the end, they left my grandfather-in-law and me behind. I struggled to hold back my laughter because everything went exactly as I expected. My grandfather-in-law said. I was surprised, relieved, and a little conflicted.
To deceive the enemy, you must first deceive your allies.
He laughed. He seemed to have been getting regular updates on the company from the executive director and Mr. Jones. With my grandfather-in-law gone, my father-in-law and husband did as they pleased. Self-righteous, completely ignoring the opinions of the employees. Constant entertaining at the company's expense. He had handed over the company to my father-in-law, but he was worried about the future, so he took this measure. In the end, he decided he couldn't entrust it to his son and left it to the executive director.
What about the $1,820,000 debt?
That's gone now. Indeed, my grandfather-in-law had been a guarantor for a friend's debt. But he also owned personal assets that exceeded that. After stepping back from the company's operations, he had invested in real estate and made a considerable profit. So there was no problem at all, but if I had said that, it was clear that my mother-in-law and husband would target it. That's why I only talked about the debt. The friend was the son of a benefactor who had helped my father-in-law when he was young. Moreover, since then, the countryside land that the son owned was going to be developed into a resort. And he was able to sell it at a high price, so there was no need to take on the debt.
You're kidding!
But more importantly, are you guys okay?
We're not okay. Both my father and I were denounced by the company. What should we do now?
Well, there's also the mortgage on the house.
What? What do you mean, the mortgage on the house?
Huh? You haven't realized it yet? The house money should have been all paid by Grandpa. Maybe you don't remember what Grandpa said at that time? When my mother-in-law talked to my grandfather-in-law about money, he had set the condition that if it's a house where everyone, including me, will live. In other words, if that wasn't the case, he wouldn't pay. Even if the house was in my father-in-law's name, my grandfather-in-law intended to pay if everyone was living together.
That's just because you assumed Grandpa would pay and didn't look at the documents properly, right? Christopher signing without checking everything. It shows he really didn't have the qualities of a president. You're kidding!
Afterward, my parents-in-law ended up losing the house they had built because they couldn't pay the mortgage. Now they live in an old apartment over 50 years old and are struggling to pay off the unpaid loan. My mother-in-law and husband have been contacting me alternately, saying we should all live together, but that's impossible now. My grandfather-in-law has retired from his chairman position, and now he has bought an old house in the countryside, and we are living together. Emily, you can go and live wherever you like, freely. You don't have to worry about living expenses. My grandfather-in-law told me, but I chose to be with him. If I'm not in the way, please let me be with you. When I said that, my grandfather-in-law's eyes welled up with tears. Thanks to Mr. Jones, the divorce was finalized, and procedures were taken to exclude my former father-in-law and former husband from inheritance. And I became my grandfather-in-law's adopted daughter. If anything happens to my grandfather-in-law, who has become my father, I intend to take care of him until the end. Now, the two of us enjoy working in the fields together.
Dad, look at this radish. It's big.
In the pouring sunlight, warm moments flow. I wish for these days to continue even one day longer.
This is definitely the way to go for pest control.
Amanda, after sprinkling insecticide in my room, cheerfully headed to the entrance. She locked me in my room, calling me a pest for not doing any housework due to my broken leg, and tried to exterminate me by spraying insecticide. If only Amanda had paid attention to whose screams were coming from the room, things wouldn't have ended up like this. I am Jessica, a 30-year-old office worker. My husband is Matthew, a 31-year-old office worker and a year older than me. We've been married for 2 years. I met Matthew at a cafe where I bought coffee almost every day. Seeing each other daily, we gradually became aware of each other, and I finally took the plunge and spoke to him, which led to our dating. About a year into our relationship, we decided to get married. My parents liked the sociable and gentle Matthew, and they always looked out for him. Matthew's family consisted of his quiet and reserved father, Daniel, his chatty and sometimes sarcastic mother, Amanda, and his sister, Megan. From the start, Amanda was prone to making thoughtless remarks.
What university did Jessica graduate from?
Where does she work? She was inquisitive about me when we first met. Coincidentally, I had graduated from a university affiliated with Matthew's, which seemed to satisfy her, but she didn't seem to understand my job. I work as a web designer. To which she responded, "That's hardly a proper job."
What a waste, considering you graduated from such a good university,
she said. Also, Amanda says a lot about things, and when she buys something.
The cakes here are tasty but too small for the price. The food used to be good, but it's gone downhill lately, probably because the chef changed.
She always ended with a complaint. In contrast to Amanda, Megan was kind. "Mom, smaller is just right. Too big and it's hard on the stomach. Even if the chef changes, the taste doesn't really change that much." And would gently chide her. Seeing such interactions,
"Mom, cut it out."
Matthew would also get annoyed and join Megan in reprimanding. Initially, I was worried about getting along with Amanda, but being told we didn't have to live together and having Megan and Matthew to back me up made me think I could manage. When we got married, Matthew and I decided not to live together with the in-laws and rented an apartment instead. However, after a while, Amanda misstepped while walking down the stairs, fell, and broke her leg. Due to her age, Amanda had to be hospitalized for a while for both treatment and rehabilitation. While Amanda was hospitalized, Megan took care of her, but the problem was with Daniel. Daniel is a nice, quiet man but completely incapable of household chores. He had left all the cooking and laundry to Amanda, to the point where he struggled even to use a microwave oven. Megan did check in on the house occasionally, but with her own job and managing Amanda's laundry during her hospital stay, taking care of Daniel was clearly too much for her.
Hey, Matthew. Since I can do some of my work from home, how about we take care of Daniel for a while?
I suggested commuting to the in-laws' house until Amanda was discharged.
That would really help. Thank you.
Matthew looked apologetic. Our apartment and the in-laws' house were about a 20-minute drive apart. So, I decided to go there after work to prepare meals and do the laundry. Daniel told us.
I'm sorry for the trouble. This is a big help,
he says and hands over the money. Eventually, even after Amanda is discharged, I'd like you to keep helping out for a while. That's what people started saying. 2 months into commuting between our apartment and the in-laws' house, Amanda's discharge was finalized. Thank you for taking care of Daniel. You really didn't have to go to such lengths. Amanda was her usual self. Hearing this, Matthew became visibly irritated and retorted.
That's no way to speak.
But Amanda seemed unfazed. It was fine while I was hospitalized, but it's going to be harder after I'm discharged. I'd like you to live here and help out around the house. Without a hint of remorse, Amanda proposed we move in. We refused on the spot, but Amanda, perhaps due to her previous fracture, started frequently falling and claiming she had broken bones again. Fortunately, there were no fractures, but given the doctor's warning that a real break wasn't out of the question, we had a serious discussion about what to do next. Our current life is disrupted by sudden calls from Amanda, with both of us working. Moreover, Daniel has retired, leaving no income, and ignoring Amanda's demands would unfairly burden Megan. We decided it was better to live together than to inconvenience everyone by continuing as we were, so we reluctantly started living with the in-laws. 3 months into this arrangement. This time, when I went shopping myself, I was hit by a car and fell down. As a result of that accident, I broke my leg. Fortunately, it's not like I can't live my life with a cast and crutches. I decided to respond by having my job switched to remote work. Even though I can use crutches, I can no longer able to do household chores in my daily life. However, my ability to do household chores was compromised, increasing Amanda's workload, for which I apologized. Amanda, I'm sorry for this situation. I'll be relying on you for housework for a while. Amanda, as usual, responded with sarcasm.
Oh, maybe you should have just stayed in the hospital then. I didn't inconvenience Daniel when I was hospitalized. Are you saying I should do the housework with my bad leg?
That's terrible, she replied with his usual sarcasm. This is so annoying because I don't say it in front of Matthew or Daniel. I'm sorry. I'll do what I can within my limits, considering I also have work. Given my fracture, we needed Amanda's cooperation to manage Daniel's care. Seeing this, Amanda said, "Work? What are you doing? Is there even work you can do inside the house? It just looks like you're playing around to me. Hiding in your room, spending money. You're just like a pest, Jessica." After saying that, I started breathing heavily and left the room. After that day, Amanda began to harass me more blatantly. It started with minor comments but escalated over time. Hey, at least carry the dishes. And if you're eating, pay for your food. I don't know what you're doing on that laptop, but you should at least pay for utilities. She would say this every time she saw me, and eventually, I was given clearly leftover food, different from what Daniel and Matthew had. Matthew got angry each time and didn't believe her claims about money. Knowing I couldn't move freely. I'm off to my class, so please do the shopping at the supermarket. Amanda would still ask. On the day I went to the hospital, greeting neighbors as I left the house. Oh, Jessica. It's not good for someone young like you not to work. You should be helping Amanda out a bit. I was lectured. It seems Amanda has been spreading rumors in the neighborhood that I'm letting Matthew do all the work while I take it easy. This not only intensified my anger towards Amanda, but also left me frustrated with neighbors who sided with her despite seeing my condition. I decided I couldn't stand living together any longer, even if Amanda and Daniel might rely on Megan after I leave. I've reached my limit. I resolved to find a place and move out as soon as my fracture healed, and I've been enduring since then. One day, Megan came to visit. Daniel got engrossed in a game of chess with a friend. Amanda seemed so happy to have Megan back that she started drinking. It's good that Megan came back. A daughter is the best, after all. Jessica here, just because she's injured, she wants me to do all the housework. She rambled on. Megan looked a bit troubled. But Jessica is injured, so it can't be helped. And defended me. I was hospitalized with a fracture until recently too. And now she says she's working remotely from home, but who knows what she's really doing? She's just wasting our money. Amanda, perhaps fueled by alcohol, was getting worked up. Megan, trying to prevent the atmosphere from becoming more tense, intervened by sharing some light-hearted stories from recent times. The next morning, Daniel had left early for golf. I had to go to the hospital for rehabilitation, which was a 30-minute drive away. Unable to drive myself, I was dependent on Matthew, who had the day off, to take me. It looks like Amanda and Megan are still sleeping, so let's not wake them. Right. Mom and Megan had quite a bit to drink last night for the first time in a while, so we'll leave without waking them. We left the house by 8 a.m. After the rehabilitation session at the hospital, it was nearly 11 a.m. Since Megan is here, why don't we go out for lunch or pick something up? I suggested that, calling Megan on her mobile phone. That sounds good. You should take it easy once in a while, Jessica. I'll give Megan a call. Calling Megan on her mobile phone. However, there was no sign of Megan answering her mobile phone. Huh? Maybe she's already left? She's not answering her phone. No, she should still be at home. What's going on? As we returned home, puzzled, we found Amanda drinking coffee in the living room. Amanda, we're back. Upon hearing my voice, Amanda turned pale and was visibly shocked. The next moment, she rushed past Matthew and me, heading straight for my room. What? What happened? Following Amanda, we noticed 3 door stoppers fixed on my room's door. Since the door opens outward, placing stoppers on the hallway side would prevent it from opening from the inside. In a panic, Amanda removed the stoppers and flung the door open, releasing a cloud of smoke. The stinging sensation made us cough. And Matthew quickly opened all the windows to ventilate the room. Megan was nowhere to be seen. As Amanda frantically called out Megan's name, there was no sign of her in the room. I entered Matthew's room, supporting myself with my crutch, and made it to the balcony. There, I found Megan sitting curled up. Matthew! Matthew, it's serious! Megan is here! Hearing me shout, Matthew came to the balcony. He returned with a chair and helped Megan to move. Are you okay, Megan? Megan, are you feeling all right? When asked this, Megan looked pained and said, I thought I was going to die. She choked out. While we were rescuing Megan, Amanda seemed unable to stand and sat down in shock. Hey, Mom. What exactly is going on here? Matthew confronted Amanda with a stern tone. Exactly. Are you listening, Amanda? Following Matthew's lead, I also pressed for answers, and Megan joined in. Yes, what's all this about? Glaring at her. Amanda mumbled in a small voice. It's because of Jessica. I thought since she's a pest control spray would be. And then, I had no idea Megan was there. Amanda spoke as if she couldn't believe it. I wanted to sleep in the guest room last night, but I couldn't stand Dad's cigarette smell. So, I slept in Jessica's room. Megan replied. I slept on the floor and let Megan have the bed. Responding to that, Amanda said without a hint of remorse. What have I done? I thought Jessica was the one sleeping in the bed. I had no idea Megan was there. Megan added, by the time I realized, the room was filled with smoke and the door wouldn't open. So, I escaped to the balcony. Megan was on the verge of tears. As I patted Megan's back, she started crying in relief. Seeing this, Amanda yelled,
It's all because Jessica left without saying anything.
I yelled. Unable to forgive her, I glared back at Amanda and retorted.
How can you say that without even apologizing? It's obviously wrong to spray insecticide in a room with people.
Amanda, infuriated by my response, turned red and lunged at me. Megan then grabbed Amanda's shoulder, pulling her away.
What would you have done if something happened to my baby?
She started shouting.
Baby?
Amanda repeated, as if she hadn't heard at all. Megan had actually come back to her parents-in-law's house to announce her pregnancy. The reason she avoided sleeping in a room that smelled of cigarettes and didn't join Amanda in drinking was all because she was pregnant.
Why didn't you say something so important sooner?
Amanda, furious, confronted Megan. But, Mom, you were really drunk and tipsy yesterday. Even if I told you then, you would have just forgotten. Dad was busy talking with a friend all day, and I wanted to tell both of you properly. That's why I planned to talk about it tonight. Megan started crying again, recalling the events. Matthew, who had been silent, finally spoke up.
This isn't the time to argue. Megan, let's go to the hospital.
Right, this isn't the time for this discussion. I'll get ready. Matthew stood up, saying he'd get the car, and headed to the entrance. I went back to the room to grab Megan's things in her place. It took some time due to my crutch, but there was no conversation between Amanda and Megan during that time.
It's all because of Jessica, because of the pest.
She was still blaming me. Megan, without making eye contact with Amanda, was crying and caressing her belly. At the hospital, we explained the situation and Megan was examined immediately. For now, everything seemed okay, but the doctor advised regular checkups beyond the usual prenatal care. Believing the quick escape to the balcony likely prevented any harm. Megan was praised for her quick thinking in such a panic. Back home, Megan reported the hospital's findings to Amanda. There were no issues at the hospital. Amanda, relieved.
That's good to hear. But it all started because of Jessica. If she hadn't disappeared like that. Megan, it's not my fault. I was just trying to deal with a pest, you understand?
Amanda pleaded with Megan. But Megan looked at her coldly.
Even if your target was Jessica, it's wrong to trap someone and use such strong insecticide. There might be no effect on the baby for now, but the fact that I was nearly killed is real.
I'll be taking legal action. Megan shook off Amanda's pleading hands.
How absurd, suing your own parent.
It's exaggerated to think insecticide could kill a person. Jessica, say something. It's all because of you, after all. Take responsibility. Amanda then demanded that I convince Megan. At this point, I was so appalled I was speechless. Facing Amanda.
How can you not even offer an apology at this point? What kind of person treats someone as a pest and actually attempts to kill them with insecticide? I can't live with someone like that any longer.
I said, Matthew then also.
What Mom did is unforgivable. It's tough on Dad, but we're moving out.
Saying this, he left the room to start packing. We prioritized leaving the house, shaking off a clinging Amanda. That same day, Matthew and I packed our belongings and went to a hotel, deciding to look for a new place to live. We informed Daniel that we were moving out and wouldn't be returning home. Despite his initial disbelief, citing Amanda's usual behavior towards me and hearing a similar account from Megan, Daniel had to accept the truth. Soon after, Amanda and Daniel's life fell apart. Amanda, who had misunderstood me as an unemployed shut-in, didn't realize that my income was comparable to Matthew's, and I had been contributing a significant amount to the household expenses. Despite repeatedly telling Amanda about my remote work and financial contributions, including most of the in-laws' house expenses, she never believed me. Thinking all the money came from Matthew. No matter how many times Matthew explained, she wouldn't understand, and despite feeling bad for Daniel, we were preparing to leave due to the untenable situation. That's why we were able to quickly pack and move to a hotel. After we left, Amanda reached out for financial help, but we ignored all her calls. About a month after we moved out, Matthew, concerned about Daniel, visited the in-laws' house on his day off. To his surprise, Amanda was gone, and Daniel was living alone.
"Where's Mom?"
Daniel explained.
"Amanda and I are divorced now. After what she did to Jessica, who was nothing but kind to us. And Megan has cut ties, saying she'd never visit again if Mom was here."
Daniel recounted the events following our departure. Amanda had resisted the divorce.
"Why should we divorce? It's unbelievable. Dealing with pests is normal, isn't it?"
She stubbornly refused to sign the divorce papers initially.
"As long as Amanda is here, Megan won't visit, and we could be sued."
Daniel, facing potential legal action and Megan's estrangement, pressed Amanda.
"Fine, but make sure the property division is fair."
She eventually agreed, packing her belongings and leaving. Megan received all the money from the property division as a settlement to avoid filing a police report. After leaving, Amanda moved into a cheap apartment nearby but became isolated from her neighbors. When Daniel evicted Amanda, he said,
"What Amanda did is no different from attempted murder. Megan's survival was purely by chance."
Daniel had shared with others that what Amanda did was akin to attempted murder, only lucky that Megan survived. This story turned Amanda into a pariah, shunned by neighbors and ignored even when she greeted them. Her participation in local activities was met with cold shoulders, leading her to flee to a distant place with no connections. "My leg fully healed, allowing a return to normal life." Fortunately, Megan and her baby faced no adverse effects, and she later gave birth to a healthy child. Megan occasionally visits Daniel with her grandchild, enjoying a peaceful life without Amanda's return.
"You should just keep quiet and provide the money."
3 years into my marriage. Invited by my in-laws whom I hadn't seen since a family meeting, I arrived at a fancy restaurant only to find no seat for me. As I attempted to call a server, my mother-in-law, Sarah, stopped me.
"Did you really think you'd dine with us as a wife? How presumptuous. Be aware that your role is to provide money."
I'm Jennifer, a 31-year-old. I'm a nurse. I met my husband, Robert, through a friend's introduction. Curious and adventurous, Robert often took me to various places, making even my indoor inclinations enjoyable. Although I'm an indoor person, going out with Robert was fun and the time passed quickly. We started dating right away and got married after 2 years of dating. We are currently in our 3rd year of marriage. Robert works in a factory, but his income has decreased dramatically because he recently stopped working night shifts. We can't live on Robert's salary, so I pay for our living expenses and save Robert's salary. She lives with Robert and they don't have any children yet. 3 years have passed since the university hospital I work at has been so busy with emergency surgeries and night shifts that it has been difficult to find time for my husband and I. My mom tells me that it's time to think about my child. I wonder if the parents-in-law want to see their grandchildren's faces soon, but I can't imagine what they think. Because I have never met my parents-in-law since I got married. When Robert went to the in-laws' house, I was told that I didn't have to come even though I said I would go with him, so it became common for Robert to go home alone. Robert is usually busy with housework and work, and because of his job, he doesn't get much time off, so instead of going to the in-laws' house and going home right away, he was deeply concerned about whether it would be better for Robert to just go home and take it easy. It seemed like I was telling my parents-in-law that I was too busy with work to go back to the in-laws' house. We haven't had any contact for the past 3 years, other than occasionally hearing about the current status of parents-in-law through Robert. Robert used to do the housework with me when we first got married, but he gradually stopped doing the housework, and now I do everything. When I get home from work, I complain to Robert, who doesn't do any housework and watches TV and laughs, but my complaints are always ignored. Since Robert leaves the house earlier and comes back later, I have told him many times that I want him to at least take in the laundry, but when he comes back, he sees the laundry just as it is. Sighing, I bring in the cold, damp clothes and start preparing dinner. Our meals often involve grilling or oven use. When Robert stopped doing housework, he learned to cook in the oven, which allowed him to cook at the same time, in order to free up time. While I'm waiting for the food to bake, I fold the laundry and clean the bathroom. Meanwhile, Robert is playing games and reading books and doesn't show any signs of helping out. Until about a year ago, I used to ask him to help me, but he wouldn't budge, saying that someone he was interested in could do it. I fought back and waited until Robert moved, but the dust was accumulating and mold was growing in the bathroom, so in the end I couldn't stand it anymore and started moving. One day, after a night shift, Robert, getting ready for work, mentioned, "Jennifer, we're going to that restaurant this Sunday," he said. The restaurant he referred to was a fancy place about a 20-minute walk from our home. "What's the occasion? Why a restaurant all of a sudden?" "Actually, Mom and Dad want to have a meal together. It's been a while, and you can come, right?" Despite being exhausted and preferring sleep over dining out, I couldn't decline an invitation from my in-laws. Especially since it had been a long time since our last family meeting. So, I agreed to go. On the promised Sunday, I managed to adjust my work schedule to make it in time and headed to the restaurant with Robert. The staff seemed puzzled when we mentioned our reservation. I excused myself to the restroom, leaving Robert talking to the staff. I could hear bits of their conversation about seating but didn't get the details. Upon returning, Robert dismissed it as nothing when I inquired about their discussion. "Robert, Jennifer. It's been a while. Please, take a seat." Sarah appeared strong-willed but was a beautiful woman.
"Dad, Mom, it's good to see you both looking well."
Robert promptly took his seat. "Joseph, Sarah, it's been a while. Thank you for having us today." I greeted my mother-in-law Sarah and father-in-law Joseph with nervous politeness after not seeing them for so long. As I tried to take a seat, I noticed there were only 3 chairs, with no place for me.
It seems we're 1 chair short. I'll just check with the staff."
I thought it was a mistake on the store's part, so I went to call for a staff member, but Sarah said, "Jennifer, wait.
There was never a seat for you to begin with,"
she said to me with a sharp look.
"What do you mean?"
Seeing my confusion, Sarah raised an eyebrow and said,
"Did you really think, as a wife, you'd be dining with us? How presumptuous. Jennifer, you're only needed for settling the bill. After all, a wallet doesn't need to eat, does it?"
he said with a wicked smile. Shocked by Sarah's attitude, I looked at Robert, seeking support, but found him sharing a malicious grin with Joseph. It dawned on me then that everyone but me was in on this arrangement. Feeling repulsed by this so-called family, I quickly responded, "Understood," and left the room. As I was leaving,
"Just keep your wallet open and stay quiet,"
I heard. As I was passing the reception to leave, the staff member who had shown me to the room called out to me,
"Your husband mentioned you'd be taking care of the bill before leaving."
I was stopped. I realized then that Robert's conversation with the server when I went to the restroom was about this. "I've told them that. There's been a change of plans, one of the 3 will pay." And did not pay. I didn't settle the bill and rushed out of the restaurant, ran home, packed my belongings into a large suitcase, and quickly made my way to the station. My parents' home is about an hour from the nearest station. On my way, I called my mom to let her know I was coming home. She was surprised by the sudden news but sensed something was wrong and assured me, "We'll talk properly when you get back," she said to me. Hearing my mom's voice helped me regain my composure, despite being on the verge of breaking down from sadness, frustration, and anger. When I arrived at the nearest station to my parents' home, my mom was there to pick me up. We loaded my suitcase into the car and headed home. After arriving and sharing the day's events and my life up to that point, my dad,
"I didn't raise Jennifer to be a slave for someone's family. Cut ties with them,"
visibly angry, said. My dad is well known in our neighborhood as a loving husband who always treasures my mom. He would immediately change into an apron upon returning from work, cook with mom, clean, and finish household chores during weekdays to maximize family time on weekends. Growing up watching my parents, I aspired to have a similar family life. Robert used to help with household chores and seemed considerate when we were dating, so I believed we could build a family like my parents. However, that lifestyle changed within 3 months into our marriage. My mom gently asked me, "What do you want to do, Jennifer?" My mind was already made up. I want a divorce. Upon hearing this, my mom hugged me tightly.
You've done well holding on until now.
She rubbed my back. Something within me snapped, and I broke down crying in my mom's arms. About 3 hours after returning home, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. All calls from Robert. The missed calls had exceeded 30. Reluctantly answering, Robert's voice came through, loud enough as if he was about to burst through the phone.
Jennifer, why did you leave without paying? Now I had to cover it, in front of Mom too. How could you not handle this properly?
He yelled so loudly that my parents, who were a little far away, could hear him. I was so astounded by his reaction that I simply said, "I'm going to divorce you, Robert." And as I was about to hang up,
Jennifer, wait. Please reconsider. There's a reason for this.
Confronted with the ultimatum of divorce, a panicked Robert began to reveal the truth behind the dinner. "Actually, Mom has been insisting I bring you over. But I lied to you and took money behind your back. I thought if you visited, they'd realize the lie and stop giving me money. That would make things difficult for us financially." Robert's lie was that I wasn't earning well, and that we were in dire need of financial assistance. He admitted to spending the money received on in-game purchases. Sarah, who had wanted to lecture the supposedly non-earning me, would have discovered Robert's lie if we had met. To save his skin, Robert prevented me from visiting, which Sarah misconstrued as Robert prioritizing a useless me over her. It's said that Sarah is the kind of person who isn't satisfied unless she's the best at everything. Sarah, who can't stand not being the priority, was infuriated by Robert's repeated prioritization of me by allowing only him to visit. To appease Sarah, Robert asked how he could prove his loyalty to her. Sarah suggested that making me pay for a fancy dinner would suffice, leading to the planned dinner. I had no choice. "Understand, Jennifer. Without you, I can't make it on my own." Thinking such a reason would be acceptable to me was beyond belief. Despite reduced income, Robert didn't seek a better job or work extra. He just relied on his parents' money, spending it all on his hobbies, unrelated to our household needs. Essentially, he was only looking out for himself. How could I possibly understand that? I felt disdain and disgust towards Robert, unable to envision a life with him.
Sorry, but I can't understand that at all. If you won't agree to a divorce, I'll get a lawyer involved.
After hanging up, a frantic Robert sought counsel from Sarah and Joseph. "Mom, Dad, Jennifer's been hiding her income, buying lots of designer bags. She even mentioned divorce earlier." Robert once again lied to gain sympathy from Sarah and Joseph.
What? That woman deceived my dear Robert and made him pay for the restaurant without even apologizing? Unforgivable.
Sarah, visibly enraged, distorted her face with anger.
Such a woman isn't suitable for Robert. Divorce her immediately.
Joseph was also furious. To proceed with the divorce, I met with Robert, Sarah, and Joseph to get the paperwork started. It had been about 2 weeks since the restaurant incident, as coordinating our schedules took some time due to my busy work life. "Please sign here." I laid the divorce papers on the table.
Jennifer, is it okay for you to act like this?
Remember, Dad and Mom are here.
If you apologize now, we can forget about the divorce.
Robert, having enlisted Sarah and Joseph as his allies, spoke as if he were the one initiating the divorce.
My decision hasn't changed, and I have no intention of apologizing.
Could you please sign this? Disliking Robert and his parents, I didn't hesitate to push for their signatures. Sarah, glaring at me.
What a hateful person. I can't believe someone like you was Robert's wife.
Joseph, patting Robert's shoulder.
Good that you're getting rid of such a wife.
Wait a minute. Robert seemed surprised by my reaction, scrambling to stop the divorce, but Sarah and Joseph urged him to sign quickly, and he reluctantly did. Thanks to Sarah and Joseph, I was able to finalize the divorce smoothly and felt relieved. I couldn't believe he thought bringing Sarah and Joseph, who were pro-divorce, would convince me. I filed the divorce papers that day and officially became strangers with Robert and the others. I couldn't grasp Robert's way of thinking until the end, doubting how I could have been married to such a person for 3 years. Robert seemed to have been complaining about the divorce at work, where his colleagues said, "Heard about Robert? Acts like it's all his wife's fault, but anyone who hears that would divorce him in a heartbeat. It's scary how he thinks he's not in the wrong. Clearly, Robert's the one to blame. I used to like him, but I was so wrong. I'm planning to keep my distance now." Despite being an adult, Robert, who still gets an allowance from his parents and was dumped by his wife, is now isolated and viewed coldly. The rumors spread, and when Sarah and Joseph heard the truth, they called me. I answered the phone without knowing it was from Sarah and Joseph, as it was an unknown number. "Sorry for calling out of the blue, Jennifer. I got your number from Robert. We heard the real story through rumors and checked with Robert. He was lying, wasn't he? I'm so sorry for what happened. We've scolded Robert. Joseph and I want to apologize in person. Would you meet with us?" I was apologized to by Sarah, but her actions at the restaurant, despite being deceived by Robert, were unforgivable. "I'm glad you understand the truth. But an apology over this phone call will suffice." I decided not to mend my relationship with Sarah and Joseph and to keep my distance. Robert is now isolated at work and complaining in the neighborhood that Sarah and Joseph scolding him is my fault. This only further highlighted his erratic behavior, leading the local community to avoid him as well, leaving him to lead a lonely, squalid existence. With financial support from Sarah and Joseph cut off and no more income from me, Robert found himself in a tight financial spot. His lack of domestic skills meant he couldn't even prepare simple meals, leading him to wander restaurants in hopes of obtaining leftover food, as shared by a once-close neighbor. Since I no longer needed to support or care for Robert, I started working more without having to hold back on my job. As a result, I received a promotion and was able to move to a better house. Patients began to notice a positive change in me, often inquiring if something good had happened. Upon learning of my divorce, they started offering to introduce me to their grandchildren or sons, more so than before my marriage. My weekends are now spent shopping with friends or sleeping in as much as I like, enjoying a stress-free lifestyle. Stop leeching off me already! For over 2 decades, I thought I was giving my all to William. Yet, this is how he sees me? I wasn't leeching off him. I was just devoted to you. That's what I thought, but the words wouldn't come. As my strength drained away, William continued. Now that Daniel's working, you've got no reason to leech off me anymore. But... shut up. I don't want to hear your excuses. William raised his voice. It's over. My feelings never reached him. Just as I realized that, I heard something snap inside me. It was the sound of the thread of love that had been connecting our hearts, snapping. At the same time, my feelings for William began to fade. We were spouses just moments ago, but now, we're like strangers. William was just using me all along. He never loved me. Otherwise, he wouldn't brazenly cheat and try to kick me out. I don't care what happens to such a man. The only option left is to completely crush him. I've made up my mind. I lifted my face and gazed at William. My name is Susan, I'm 50 years old. I've been married to my husband William for 25 years. Our son Daniel, born a few years after we got married, graduated from college and started working this year. Child rearing is done, and now I can do what I want. That's what I'm thinking right now. But there's just one problem. That's my relationship with William. William is not a good husband or father. In fact, it's hard to find anything good about him. He cheats, and he doesn't even give me a proper salary. I at least want you to give me enough money for living expenses. Huh? Don't get cocky when you're living off me. William always snaps back like this. I guess it's hopeless. Maybe divorce is the only option. Lately, I've been thinking about it more and more. But I can't just say I want a divorce easily. The reason is, my Raphael Stephen, who is sick and hospitalized, asked me to take care of William. I owe Stephen, and as long as I can bear it, I have to endure it, don't I? I can't ignore Stephen's words, but my desire to divorce is strong. Caught between these conflicting feelings, I find myself reminiscing about the happier times before marriage. Ironically, that happiness began with a misfortune that befell my father. Our family ran a small restaurant. My father was in charge of cooking, and my mother managed the hall. Needless to say, the food was delicious. However, my father was incredibly bad at business. He started the restaurant with the desire to fill his customers' bellies with delicious food. That's a noble sentiment, I believe. But that sentiment alone drove his business. So, he hardly thought about profit. It didn't matter if the profit was small. As long as the customers were satisfied, that was enough for him. Obviously, this was no way to make a profit. As a result, our family's finances were always on the edge. Yet, seeing the satisfied customers, I felt proud, even as a child. So, I never interfered with my father's business. But during my college years, a crisis struck. The company supplying ingredients to my father's restaurant went bankrupt due to the recession. We had already paid for this month's supply, but now, we faced the prospect of closing the restaurant. Our management was already barely scraping by. There was no extra money to spare. Seeing my parents disheartened made me anxious too. But as a college student, there wasn't much I could do. Nor did it seem likely that the bankrupt company would refund us. The only option left for us was to close the restaurant. That's when a regular customer said, "Closing down? But the food is so good. What a waste."
But the supplier has gone bankrupt, and we're likely to be saddled with debt. Then let me support you personally. Use it to revive the restaurant.
The regular, true to his word, lent my father the money.
We appreciate it. We'll definitely pay you back.
Don't worry about the money for now. Just keep making delicious meals. After saying that, the man quickly left the restaurant. Later, my father started dealing with a different food company. The regular was apparently involved in a large-scale food distribution business, and we got our supplies at a cheaper rate than before. Fortuitously, our family's restaurant was saved from bankruptcy. About a year later, I went with my father to repay the money to the regular customer. While my father was talking to the man, a young man approached me. "So you borrowed money from my father?" It turned out, he was the son of the man who lent us the money. His name was William, and he worked in his father's company.
You're pretty. How about going out with me?
Me, with you?
Come on, think of it as a way to say thanks for the loan.
We were indeed saved by the loan, and my father had properly expressed our gratitude. I didn't think we owed anything more, but then William whispered to me,
"I could spread rumors that the restaurant's daughter is ungrateful."
That would be. I couldn't talk back. I thought it wouldn't affect me even if he spread rumors, but it could cause trouble for my father. And what would the restaurant's customers think? With these thoughts, I found myself unable to refuse William's offer. I didn't like it, but I decided to endure it, just this once. While pondering all this, I went out with William. But once we were out, it was more enjoyable than I expected. William was entertaining, knew various fun spots, and had a great taste in choosing places. Despite the terrible first impression, he might actually be a decent person. Thinking that was my mistake, I was swiftly wrapped around William's finger. Being with Susan is fun.
I'm having fun too.
With a nice girl like you, I'm thinking for the first time I could marry. Swept up by such simple words, I started dating William with a view of marriage. William continued to manipulate me in various ways. Eventually, a few years later, I found myself married to William. Of course, I never imagined then that it was all William's trap. He was kind and I felt loved by William. But it was all a lie. As soon as we got married, William showed his true colors. Here's this month's salary. Manage it well. Opening the envelope William handed me, I found a handwritten salary slip. The salary itself was deposited into the bank, so a slip alone wasn't odd. But it was strange that the salary slip was handwritten. Nowadays, handwritten documents are almost unheard of, but when I got married, it was 25 years ago. It was a time when computers were just beginning to become commonplace, and handwritten salary slips didn't seem out of place. There's more than $1,000, it seems enough. I muttered to myself, trying to be convinced. I managed somehow with that modest amount of money. As married life went on, I started to feel something was off. It was William's lifestyle. William left home at a fixed time every morning, but his return was always erratic. It varied daily. I'm busy with various tasks as my dad's successor. Then, at least let me know before you come home.
Stop nagging, I get it. I'll call.
William shouted. His attitude made me feel even more uneasy. Maybe he's out having fun. Perhaps there's someone else. Though I suspected, I couldn't confront him because I disliked being yelled at. In the end, I couldn't voice my doubts about William's behavior. Then Daniel was born. I thought things might change with a child. But William's attitude remained unchanged. Looking back, I think that's when it started. I began to vaguely consider divorce. And it was around the time Daniel started middle school. I received a call from my mother while I was out shopping for dinner.
What? Dad's hospitalized?
It was news that my father was admitted to the hospital. I rushed to the hospital. Mom's just making a big deal on the phone. My father said, laughing heartily. I was relieved. But at that moment, I remembered something and my heart skipped a beat. I made a mistake. I hadn't contacted William. By then, it was too late. My mobile phone was flooded with calls from William. Panicking, I called back, only to hear William's irritated voice.
Where the hell are you and what are you doing? Get back here and make my dinner. I'm sorry, Dad is... What? Dad? Your father?
William's tone was stern as he questioned me. I answered in a small voice. Yes, he was suddenly hospitalized.
Your father doesn't matter. You're my wife.
Startled by William's loud voice, I closed my eyes. I was terrified of his shouting, but I knew I had to stand up for myself. I gathered my courage and retorted. Is it wrong to be worried about my dad? That should be allowed, right?
Shut up. Don't talk back to me.
No, I will say this. You would rush to your own father, wouldn't you? William fell silent when I asked that. I thought it would hit close to home. But his reply was unimaginable.
Huh? I'd ignore it if my dad was hospitalized. After all, I wouldn't be troubled if he wasn't around.
I was speechless. That had to be a lie. But I couldn't deny it. After much hesitation, I told William. I'm different from you. Sorry, but you'll have to eat out tonight. That was all I could muster. I hung up the phone, still in a daze. Since that incident, I truly couldn't believe in William anymore. It was then I realized that the happy times before marriage were all an illusion.
Oh, I see. William didn't want a wife, he wanted a maid.
Saying it out loud made me sad. But I couldn't just dwell on the sadness. If I was going to divorce, I needed to prepare. I started preparing for a divorce. Years passed. And then Stephen was hospitalized. His condition was quite serious. He might not be able to leave the hospital. I relayed Stephen's medical condition to William, but he was unfazed. Does that mean it's going to cost money? It's not the time to worry about money, don't you understand? I understand. I'll contact my brother Donald. William reached out to Donald, my brother-in-law. Donald was married but had no children. So William asked if Donald could help with the hospital bills. Can you pay? It's tough for us. with Daniel and Susan and all. His attitude was as if it was someone else's problem. It reminded me of when my own father was hospitalized. It was clear he didn't care about Stephen at all. I couldn't bear it anymore. Enough. I'll manage somehow and pay for Stephen's hospital bills. Don't forget what you just said, William shouted. I nodded firmly. Ultimately, my declaration led to our family bearing the cost of Stephen's hospital bills. Moreover, Stephen stepped down from his position as president due to his illness. And William took over. Regardless, William didn't like that I had stood up to him. Since then, he started blatantly not coming home. Even when discussing Daniel's future plans. William ignored my calls and didn't come home. Dad's not coming home again today. I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm causing you trouble. It's fine, I don't care about Dad. More importantly, I want to go to college in Boston. That's right. Don't worry about tuition, I'll manage somehow. Soon after, Daniel's admission to a college in Boston was secured. As expected, William didn't see Daniel off. Once Daniel moved to Boston, the house became eerily quiet. By then, William's visits had dwindled to about once a week. There's also Stephen's hospital bills, could you transfer a little more? What? I've already transferred more than half of my salary. It should be enough for you now. The money William transferred was meager. It was clearly just a fraction of his salary. The claim of transferring more than half was undoubtedly a lie. I knew that. But I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. Years passed, and I got news that Daniel had landed a job. With Daniel employed, it might be time to bring up divorce. Over these years, I had prepared for divorce. Now, it's just about the right timing. Where and when can I bring it up to avoid arguments? Such thoughts kept haunting me. It's not about arguments, though. I chuckled wryly to myself. Then, one day, I had been visiting Stephen at the hospital. After chatting about trivial things, I headed back home as usual. As I tried to unlock the door, I was shocked. For some reason, the door was already open. Could it be a burglar? I cautiously peeked inside. From the living room, I could hear the TV and William's laughter. Relieved that William was home, I entered the living room. There, William was watching TV and laughing heartily. You're home. Yeah, I was thinking of tidying up. Tidying up? Heeding William's words, I looked around. On closer inspection, some items in the room were missing. It seems like something's missing. Yeah, I threw it away. Your stuff. My stuff? Stunned, I went back to my room. The room was silent, the computer, TV, even my favorite cup were gone. Not just that, the bed and everything else had disappeared. What's the meaning of this? I threw it out because we don't need it anymore. Don't need it anymore? What are we supposed to do now? As I raised my voice, William frowned. Then he averted his gaze and sighed. Frankly, I'm tired of supporting you. What are you talking about? I'm your wife. As I retorted, William grimaced and suddenly raised his voice. Do I have to spell it out for you? Stop leeching off me. For over 2 decades, I thought I was giving my all to William. Yet, this is how he sees me? I'm not leeching off you. I was just devoted to you. I thought that, but the words wouldn't come. As my strength drained away, William continued. Now that Daniel is working, you've got no reason to leech off me anymore. But... Shut up! I don't want to hear your excuses. William raised his voice. It's no use. My feelings never reached him. At that moment, I heard something snap inside me. It was the sound of the thread of love that had been connecting our hearts, snapping. At the same time, my feelings for William began to fade. Moments ago, we were a couple, but now we're like strangers. William had been using me all along. He never loved me. Otherwise, he wouldn't brazenly cheat and try to drive me out. I don't care what happens to such a man. The only option left is to completely crush him. Resolved, I looked up and faced William.
What? Got a complaint?
No.
If you want me to leave, I will.
I briskly closed the living room door behind me and headed to my room. But there was nothing of mine left. Not a single piece of my clothing remained.
Don't bother looking. I had the garbage collection service take it all. Which service? There's a flyer here.
That one. I picked up the service's flyer from the floor. As I dialed the number, I told William.
You'll regret this.
Leaving those words behind, I immediately left the house. The call connected right away. I explained the situation, and the person on the line understood immediately. It seemed William's actions had already raised suspicions. So, the garbage collection service had kept everything as it was.
I'll be there right away.
Thank you. I thanked them politely and ended the call. Afterward, I went to the service's place. After expressing my gratitude, I had my belongings moved to a newly rented storage unit. Relieved that my possessions were safe. I don't think getting away with something like this comes without a price. I clenched my teeth and called Daniel. After briefly explaining the situation, I ended with,
So, I've decided to move out, considering a divorce. Daniel, please be prepared for that. All right?
Got it. Bye. Daniel hung up. He seemed scared of me. Was I that angry? Puzzled, I put my mobile phone in my bag and headed to a nearby hotel. I already had a new place lined up. The reason was simple. I had been planning to discuss divorce with William soon. Divorce and move there. That was my plan for starting a new life. The schedule just moved up a bit. So honestly, I wasn't troubled. It's just that plans have moved forward by about 2 weeks. 2 weeks of hotel living. What a waste. A bad habit of a housewife, thinking about waste. I wonder if I should bill him for the hotel expenses.
Either way, be prepared, William.
I muttered and then started working on the post-divorce actions I had planned in advance. Around 10 days into my hotel stay, William called. He raised his voice as soon as I answered.
You took my money.
What are you talking about?
Don't play dumb. It's about Dad's hospital bills. The hospital just called asking for payment.
Oh, that. While thinking, I sighed and responded. You should pay it.
It's no longer my concern after being kicked out. I've been transferring living expenses to you. That's supposed to cover it.
Yes, but where's that bank account? Isn't it with you now? I retorted nonchalantly. But that account was empty. I couldn't help but laugh, knowing that.
There's an account, but it's empty. That's why I'm saying you took the money.
I haven't taken anything.
Don't lie. Who else could use it?
Didn't he realize how little he had transferred? I retorted, almost in disbelief.
It was just too little to begin with. If there's no money for the hospital bills, why don't you use your allowance? Allowance?
William started to panic, evidently thinking I didn't know. Since the beginning of our marriage, William had been giving me handwritten salary slips. That was to hide the fact that he was skimming part of his salary. In other words, the skimmed money was William's allowance. I asked Stephen once, how much is William's salary?
So, what about it?
He looked puzzled but told me. So, I know you've been taking money. When I confronted him, William fell silent. After a long pause, so long I thought the call had dropped, William suddenly raised his voice.
What's wrong with me spending the money I earned? It's your fault for spending all the money I gave you.
Uh-huh. And then?
We're getting a divorce. I'll demand alimony. And you'll return the money you've squandered.
William blurted that out, and I smiled triumphantly. I had caught him in his own words. Now William couldn't escape. I was smiling as I retorted to him. I appreciate that. I wanted a divorce too. Come over to discuss it.
No,
I want the divorce too. I'll be waiting with evidence of your infidelity. Though I couldn't see him, I imagined William's face turning pale. It was evident in his shaky voice.
What infidelity evidence?
Pretending won't help. I have photographic evidence.
Photographic evidence?
I could almost see William stuttering. Holding back laughter, I continued. I'll give you the address, so let's meet there next Sunday to talk in detail. I unilaterally gave him an address and hung up the phone. I had successfully confronted him with divorce. Now, if I could make him apologize. Honestly, that would be the hardest part. I braced myself for it. Then, on the agreed Sunday, I was at the meeting place well before the scheduled time. I think he should be arriving soon. I glanced around and soon saw William. Over here. I called out to William and he looked up in surprise.
Here?
Yes. I gave you the address, remember?
No, but this place, whose mansion is it?
William looked past me. There stood a mansion worth about $1 million. Much larger than an ordinary house, it boasted a vast garden. And was 3 stories high, complete with a home theater. Luxury cars were parked in the built-in garage. Pointing at the mansion, I smiled. This is my house. It's newly built, so it's pretty nice, right?
Your house?
Yes. I was planning to live here after the divorce, so I started building it a little while ago. Yes. The place I had summoned William to was my newly built house. Naturally, William, who had always seen me as just a housewife, was dumbfounded. Pushing such a William from behind, I entered the house. I led William to the living room. Shall we discuss then? This is my lawyer. I introduced my lawyer, who was waiting inside. But William was hardly in a state to pay attention. His gaze was unsettled, constantly scanning the surroundings. He didn't even try to look at the photos of his infidelity laid out on the table. He didn't respond when spoken to. Frankly, it was hardly a conversation. Eventually, William murmured in a low voice.
How did you afford a house like this?
Although I was amused by his curiosity, I answered. I bought it normally.
Liar! A housewife can't afford something like this.
To buy a $1 million house, one would need an annual income of around $150,000. However, I had that much income. So, I confidently replied. I earn that much. Do you have a problem with that?
No, but how did you?
I kind of helped out at a friend's company, and before I knew it, things turned out this way. The story goes back a few years. When I had decided to divorce due to the trouble over my father's hospitalization, I started preparing for it, beginning with finding a job. After the divorce, I couldn't survive without a job. So, I started looking for a job that would allow me to live independently. But there weren't any good ones. That's when I consulted my best friend, Lisa. Why don't you help me with my work? What work do you do? Aquaculture on land. Land-based aquaculture involves artificially creating facilities like pools and breeding fish in them. Despite some disadvantages, it's an eco-friendly method that prevents marine pollution. Lisa's father started it, and now Lisa was taking it over. So, I started working there. William asked tentatively. Once I started helping out, the business suddenly began doing well. What I did was mainly negotiations and administrative work. But Lisa said I was a big help. And I was promoted to an executive position. It was all coincidental, but I believe luck is part of one's ability. Listening to my story, William looked downcast. After a moment of thought, he suddenly looked up. Let's forget the divorce talk. How about we start over? As he spoke, I looked at him coldly and replied. Stop joking. No, it's not a joke, I really want to start over with you. William only wanted my money. So, I raised an eyebrow and retorted. I dislike people who cheat.
And those who neglect Stephen. No, about Dad.
Quiet.
You may not know, but I paid for your father's hospital bills.
The money William had given me was indeed very little. After paying for groceries, high utility bills, and other miscellaneous expenses, nothing was left. That was all he ever gave. Naturally, there was no way it could cover Stephen's hospital bills. Initially, I managed somehow, but after starting my job, I paid the bills with my own salary. Despite that, you wouldn't listen to me, and you never visited Stephen.
That's because, well,
how can I trust someone like that? As I raised my voice, William looked down. Then, the lawyer proceeded with the discussion about alimony. William was speechless. He remained silent and downcast until the end. Urged by the lawyer, William eventually signed the divorce papers. The alimony was set at $30,000.
Now that we are divorced, you'll be responsible for your father's hospital bills.
Understood. William nodded reluctantly. At least he didn't argue. I was relieved. Finally, I made sure William left, practically chasing him out. It was over at last. The only regret was that I didn't get an apology from William, but I had one last move. That would make him apologize. I couldn't help but smile at the thought. A few days later, after visiting the company, I was called from behind on my way home.
Hey, Susan!
I turned around to see William.
Don't call me like we're familiar.
We're divorced now.
Shut up! What the hell did you do?
William was looking at me with a flushed face. I realized what this was about. Ah, so that was the talk at the company. With that in mind, I said to him with a smile. What do you think I did?
Don't mess with me. Tell me how you got me fired.
William's outburst was amusing, and I couldn't help but smile.
It's your responsibility. You got fired as a consequence for having an affair with the company's clerk.
William's affair was with a clerk at his own company. He had been doing as he pleased, thinking he was untouchable as the president. After the divorce was settled, I reported the affair to Stephen. Stephen was furious about William's actions, while also saddened by our divorce. I showed Stephen the evidence photos of the affair, which enraged him further. Then, Stephen made an unexpected offer.
I'm going to transfer all my company shares to you, Susan.
To me? Wouldn't Donald?
No, I want to give them to you. Use them to dethrone William from his position.
Stephen explained the situation. His company was a corporation, requiring shareholder meetings or board resolutions for key decisions. Of course, decisions can also be made through board resolutions. However, it wasn't a large company. Stephen owned most of the issued shares. This meant he could make decisions as a single shareholder. In smaller companies, it's common for the president to own the majority of shares. So, by inheriting Stephen's shares, I could exercise voting rights on my own. But it wasn't me who decided to fire William. I informed Donald about acquiring the shares, and just reported William's affair. The rest was Donald's decision.
Donald was considerate. That guy! Why is he doing what you say? It's not about doing what I say. He made the decision for the company's best interest.
Hearing this, William collapsed on the spot. Then he began to plead, clinging desperately.
I was wrong. I apologize. Please forgive me. Without a job, I'll be on the streets.
But that's not my concern. It's all his responsibility.
I won't forgive you even if you apologize. Please, I'm begging you. Forgive me.
William repeatedly offered deep apologies right there. I turned away.
I'm sorry, but there's nothing I can do. Why not? If you have the shares. I sold them to Donald and his wife.
I don't want anything to do with you anymore. At that moment, I heard William's loud voice. Of course, I pretended not to hear and walked away. After being ousted as the president, William had to leave the company. He might have stayed if he were an employee, but William had joined the company through Stephen's connections and had always been arrogant.
"I'd never be just an employee,"
he used to boast. So, as soon as he was removed from his position, he was kicked out. Now he's working a part-time job at a grocery store, but re-employment at his age will be difficult. He's likely to spend his later years in poverty, filled with intense regret. As for me, after the divorce, I became more dedicated to my work. While I don't think I'll remarry, I have several male colleagues. Spring might come again. It was then when I had these thoughts. I received a call from Daniel.
"I'm bringing my girlfriend over next time." "That's wonderful. I'm looking forward to it."
I failed in my marriage, but I don't want Daniel to experience the same. But he'll be fine. Daniel is much more sensible than I was.